Thanks for coming to listen tonight from a distance. I'm sure all of you are becoming experts at Zoom by this point. We've been doing this for about a year now, so you're probably more tech savvy than I am. So the theme of this podcast was the search for extraterrestrial life. And when I'm talking about life, I'm not just talking about aliens and little green men. I'm talking about microbes, and sort of all the different ways that humans have been looking for life over the centuries, but more specifically, how they've been thinking about it in the past few decades and what they're trying to do as we sort of move forward. I mean, we've been thinking about extraterrestrial life for a really long time. There are people that claim that there are flying saucers in the backgrounds of 15th century Renaissance paintings, or that cave paintings have evidence of UFO visits. And, you know, we've had reports of strange lights, UFO sightings, and alien encounters. They're all over the place. And some of them, like the ones that have come from US Navy pilots in the past few years, have been pretty believable. The sheer number of alien-related merchandise, like stickers, socks, television shows, books, movies, theme park rides, all of this sort of demonstrates this fascination that we have for this topic. If you're feeling really adventurous, you can take an all-inclusive multi-day tour of America's UFO hotspots. You can go down to Roswell. You can go to Los Alamos. They will not give you a tour of Area 51, although you can get a tour around Area 51. I'm not sure they're so keen on letting people into that area. And then there's all kinds of UFO and extraterrestrial related conferences and festivals all over the place. So you have a sense of just how popular a topic this is. And then what really got me interested in this topic was in 2017, there was this announcement of this cigar-shaped rock on the very far reaches of our solar system. And it wasn't part of our solar system. It was just passing through on its way to somewhere else. So it really was an interstellar object. And it's the first one that we on this planet had ever seen, or that we knew about anyway. There may have been others, but we didn't recognize them for what they were. So this rock was dubbed Oumuamua. That's a Hawaiian name that means messenger coming from afar, essentially like a scout. And this was sort of a nod to its Hawaiian roots in that it was astronomers at the one of the Hawaii observatories that discovered it. So there's all kinds of speculation about this thing, that it might have been harboring intergalactic microbes and the kind of thing that if it slammed into a planet, it might seed it with life, or it might even be an alien spaceship. And you just had all kinds of excitement over the possibilities that this particular object provided. And you know, I think there were a lot of people that are like, there's no way it's aliens, there's no way it's a visiting spaceship. But the search for extraterrestrial life, especially intelligent extraterrestrial life, is very, very real and very scientific. And there are professional astronomers who use very sophisticated instruments, radio telescopes, and now very extensively expensive and huge optical telescopes. They can point these towards the deep reaches of the universe and listen and look for things that might be out of the ordinary. You've got astrobiologists who look for the biochemical signatures that might allow for life to arise on far-flung planets. And of course, even the US military is on board. You may have seen the headlines over the past few years about how the Pentagon was running a secret multi-million-dollar UFO program, which was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And then there were also, there's been ongoing work in figuring out exactly what UFOs are. So, you know, the goal here was to really look at the science and the stories that surround the search for extraterrestrial life. You know, what's the likelihood of life on other planets, or that aliens have already made the trip to visit us? And how would they get here? And what does it mean if they show up? Or what if they don't show up? So I wanted to examine the science and the culture and the philosophy of a universe where we might not be alone, and why the idea of life, of alien life, both kind of fascinates us and also maybe makes us a little bit nervous. So the series, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to listen to it, or if you have at all, but there were 10 episodes. And I'll just kind of lay out what I covered in that. And then if there are questions that you want to know more about on a particular topic, I'm happy to answer those when we get to the Q&A portion of this. So the first episode really dealt with Oumuamua, which, as I mentioned, was this rock that came from interstellar space and passed through our galaxy and went on by. Although maybe it wasn't a rock, because there were just all of these questions about what it really was. It moved kind of weird. It had an odd shape. It wasn't following the trajectory that they had plotted out for it. It kept moving off just a little bit, and they couldn't figure out why, these scientists that were watching it. And one of the theories that came forward about this came from a Harvard astronomer known as, whose name is Avi Loeb. And he speculated that it could have been an alien spacecraft, that it could have been a light sail that was passing through, taking pictures of galaxies before it went on to its next location. Other people said that it's probably just a comet. But both sides were really enthusiastic about the idea that there could be some sort of extraterrestrial life on board this, whether it was one-celled or big-brained. And while aliens kind of, I think a lot of people, when they hear alien, they think maybe of the tabloids, or it kind of elicits giggles, or, maybe that's not real, or, we don't really think that they've come to Earth. But there are a lot of serious scientists and statesmen and the military, as I mentioned, who consider extraterrestrial life a real possibility. And so this first episode really kind of gives an overview of that and talks specifically about what it was with Oumuamua that sparked so many people's interest. And the second episode gets into a little bit more of sort of the microbial side of things. It looks at the scenario where microbes might still be living on certain planets or certain moons, even our own solar system. If you think about these microbes on, say, Oumuamua, imagine living on a rock that's speeding millions of miles through a cold, radiation-filled vacuum of space. And the hostility of that scenario kind of makes the idea seem impossible. But life, especially life as we know it here on Earth, has some really amazing adaptive capabilities. You've got one-celled organisms that live in nuclear cooling ponds, and they can thrive on battery acid. And it wasn't until sort of the 1960s, 1970s that we realized just how extreme the conditions where we could find life. You could find them in the thermal pools of Yellowstone National Park. And all of a sudden we realized that life is a lot more abundant than we had perhaps realized to begin with. These little one-celled organisms are called extremophiles because they live at the extreme ends of what we would consider habitable. But if there's microbes and little one-celled things living in these sort of far edges of where life might be, who knows how much further that goes? I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. So there's the possibility that microbial life could, in fact, call Oumuamua and a lot of other seemingly inhospitable places home, including Mars. I think some of you might be aware that there is a mission that's supposed to land on Mars later this month, Perseverance. And the goal of Perseverance is to sort of get down into the soils of Mars and look and see if there are any microbes, or if there's evidence of ancient microbes that might have lived there once upon a time. So that's kind of exciting. Keep your eyes on the news for that. But in terms of where to look for life off of our planet or outside of our neighbors, that kind of gets a little bit more complicated, because it seems like there's a wider and wider range of possibilities of where life could exist. And astrobiologists are searching all these distant exoplanets. These exoplanets are essentially planets that are orbiting stars that are not our sun. And they're looking for signs of microbial life. And then you also have scientists at the SETI Institute who are looking for something or someone that's a little bit more advanced. But the problem here is that we only really have one example of what life would look like, and that is life here on Earth. So we don't really know what life might look like elsewhere. Someone explained this to me as, if you think about, let's say you lose your keys on a dark street during the night at some point, and the place you're going to look for the keys is going to be the under the streetlight. Even if you didn't drop your keys there, that's the place where there's light. And so that's kind of where you start looking, even though you aren't entirely sure that's where your keys are going to be. So likewise with life, we kind of look for life that's similar to life on Earth because that's really the only example we have. But it could be all kinds of things to life that we just don't even understand yet. I don't even know that we have a really strong working definition of what life is. So there's a lot of questions about how we look for something that we don't quite recognize what it might be. The third episode kind of gets into some of the math. And speaking as someone who was not particularly good with math and big numbers, I find a little bit off-putting. This was kind of a fun episode to do because I talked to a few scientists who were able to really help me understand the scale and scope of the universe and just how much space we're talking about, how big these places are that we're trying to explore and find out information from. So one of the scientists I talked to was a man by the name of Frank Drake, who some of you may have heard of. Back in the 1960s, he came up with an equation that's known as the Drake equation. And this still really resonates with scientists and UFO enthusiasts. It asks the questions about, or it asks how many planets out there could give rise to extraterrestrial life that becomes intelligent and is able to communicate with us and exists for long enough for that message to get to us and for us to reply back to them. And there's all these factors that he weighs, like habitability of a planet and the likelihood that life would arise on it. So we talk about that equation and work through that. And then in the second part of the episode, I take a walk on the University of Colorado Boulder's campus where they have a scale size model of the solar system. And they've crammed it down into 1/3 of a mile, which is obviously significantly smaller than the actual solar system by about 10 billion times, I think is the scale, is 1 to 10 billion. But as you're walking this model solar system, you sort of realize how far humans have actually gone, which is about 4 centimeters, so roughly 1.5 inches from Earth to the moon. And how much more distance there is to go. And it gives you a sense of just time and scale. And that's one of the big obstacles that we have when we're talking about the search for extraterrestrial life. The fourth episode gets into Roswell. And I went down to Roswell, New Mexico for the Roswell UFO Festival, which they hold every single summer. And this particular event commemorates what happened, an event that happened in 1947, which is when something, we don't know what, crashed into the desert and left this trail of debris. And it was picked up by the military that had a base there. And they said that it was a UFO. And then a day later, they said, no, actually, they said it was a flying saucer. And then a day later, they said, no, it's a weather balloon. And it's kind of remained this question for a lot of people as to what actually happened there. Is the government hiding something? Is there a cover up going on? Were there aliens involved? And it's become kind of a cultural touchstone in American society. A lot of people know the references to Roswell. Some people just think it's kind of kitschy and fun to go to a festival like this. Some people take it very, very seriously. And it was interesting to go to this event and meet all of these people who kind of run the whole range. You know, you had people making tinfoil hats and with pipe cleaners and pom-poms who were just there because it's kind of fun. And then you had people there who were seriously lecturing on this and looking at the evidence and looking at the materials that have been gathered and trying to explain what actually might have happened there in the desert in 1947. In the meantime, Roswell, this is their bread and butter. They officially, the town says that yes, a UFO crashed in the desert because, you know, they have a lot of visitors that come in every year to find out more about what actually happened there now, gosh, almost 75 years ago. The next episode after that gets into the Pentagon and the Department of Defense UFO program that was being run secretly between 2012 and 2017 when it was shut down. For this one, I spoke with Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader, because he was involved in getting funding for this program. And part of the reason that it was secret is because I think there was this feeling that if they came out and said, we are going to be looking for UFOs with your taxpayer dollars, there might be some people who were like, I feel like there's better money, better things we can do with that money. So they opted to make it what they call a black money program and funnel a small amount, roughly $22 million, which seems like a lot of money, but in the Defense Department budget is not actually that big an amount of money, to look into UFO sightings that have been happening on the military's watch for decades now. And it was going through all of these different sightings and trying to see if they could be chalked up to something other than an unidentified flying object. And here's where there was kind of an interesting point that was made to me, which is that the term UFO, yeah, there are UFOs. They're simply unidentified flying objects. But culturally, a lot of times when we talk about UFOs, we're talking about aliens, or we're thinking about aliens. And so the distinction that was made for me in talking to a lot of the people affiliated with this program and with the Pentagon is that when they're talking about UFOs, they're actually talking, they now call them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. Whereas with the idea that it's not an assumption that it's automatically aliens. It's just something that's unidentified. And then the goal is to explore it a little bit further and see what it actually is, which makes a lot of sense, because if you're flying extremely expensive military hardware up there in the skies going like hundreds and hundreds of miles an hour, you kind of want to know if there's something in your airspace that might cause some problems. So that was that particular episode. The next episode that I got into is about some of the new advancements that we have with the science. There is a group called the Breakthrough Initiatives, and this is funded by a Russian billionaire by the name of Yuri Milner, and he has put several $1 million into 3 different programs. One of them is called Breakthrough Watch, which involves using telescopes, very fancy optical telescopes, to look at planets that are way far away and see if we can see any signs of potential technology on them. And they do this by looking for gases that might be emitted that would be indicative of life, or any sort of structures that might be questionably, that might raise some questions. Then there's another one called Breakthrough Listen, which is radio telescoped, which is listening for any sort of radio signals that come in that, again, might indicate that a civilization that's using technology. And the last one is called Breakthrough Starshot. And this is pretty interesting because Avi Loeb, who's that Harvard astronomer that I mentioned at the very beginning, who said that Oumuamua might be an alien spacecraft, he is involved in this project. And the goal of this project is to take little tiny postage stamp sized probes, so like really itty bitty. And they would have, they've got a little camera on them. They've got some very small electronics. And what they would do is they would use a sail, what's called a light sail, because it uses a laser, a very powerful laser beam, to propel it through space. They would do that to send it to Alpha Centauri, which is 4 light years away. And they could send this sail at roughly 20% the speed of light. So, it would take about 20 years to get there. And then it would snap photos and send that information back for us to see if there's any signs of civilization on Alpha Centauri. But if this works, this is a way for us to be able to get out and explore the galaxy in a way that is much harder to send an actual person, because with a person, you have to worry about life support, you have to worry about fuel, you have to worry about all these, all this extra weight you have to carry to like keep somebody alive and going. Whereas if you can send something small like a probe, or, even further into the future, you can send robotics, it kind of eliminates some of those concerns. So this is sort of talking about the cutting edge science that we're doing to try and find extraterrestrial intelligence and life. The next episode kind of gets into, well, what do we do if we do get a message? Are we going to know what the aliens are saying? Are we going to know what they're trying to communicate to us? And it's kind of a fun experiment to think about, you know, think about how many languages there are on Earth and how hard it is to even talk between those languages that all arise kind of from the same source. Think about how when you type when you're texting with someone or you're emailing with someone, how that message can get misconstrued. And this is somebody you know and trust and like, and you can totally get it wrong. So then how are we going to communicate with aliens? How are we going to know what their language is? How are we going to get our point across? There's just all these kinds of interesting questions that come up around that idea. And most scientists think that they'll probably be math-based because they think that math would be sort of a universal language, but there's no guarantees. They may not have ears, they may not have vocal cords, they might not have eyes, they might communicate through like color or touch. And so it's sort of interesting to think about some of these more speculative ideas. And there are several scientists doing work on this. There's a group called METI, which is Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and they've already sent some messages out to see if we'll get a response, and are thinking how we might respond to people. The next episode gets into some of the fun side of aliens, the more popular culture stuff, which is movies and television and how we've depicted aliens in popular culture over the past decades. And it's interesting to see that as things are happening on Earth, the aliens that we put in our movies kind of depict, they sort of represent some of those conflicts. So for instance, in the 1950s, some of the movies like Invasions of the Body Snatchers, those were drawing on this fear that we had about communism and the Red Scare and this idea that, you would be wholly subsumed by this amorphous mass and it would take you over and you would lose your individuality. And so they're drawing very direct parallels to what's happening with the fears of communism. And as we kind of go through different cultural moments in society, we see those get reflected in how aliens are depicted in these movies. So having talked to this professor who is a professor of science fiction and having her walk me through the different eras of movies and the different eras of aliens, it's really interesting to see how those evolve and change depending on what we're going through at the time. The next episode talks about the idea of how, especially as America has become more and more secular and people have turned a little bit more away from religion, how aliens in some cases have replaced God in culture and in religious culture. And an example of this was given to me at the UFO Watchtower down in the San Luis Valley. And the woman who runs it says, there are hundreds and hundreds of people that come every year and they go into the garden that surrounds the watchtower and they sort of pray to the aliens that they will come and grant them a wish or help them out of a particular difficult time. And that there's sort of this faith that aliens might provide information for us as a society on how to move forward, how to get out of concerns we have over things like climate change or nuclear war or, an asteroid hitting us. Do they have solutions to these things? Because chances are because our planet is a younger planet and our galaxy is our solar system is a younger solar system, chances are that there are civilizations, if there are civilizations out there, they are older than us. So hopefully they are wiser than us and might be able to impart some information. And then the final episode kind of gets to this idea of what happens if we do find aliens? What does it mean for us culturally to know that we're not alone in the universe? How does that change our perspective on life in this galaxy, on our view of ourselves and our place in the world? And on the other side, what does it mean if we don't find anything? What if we're completely alone? What does that tell us? And it kind of raises these philosophical questions about what it means to be looking for alien life, and often how this search for alien life in all of its forms is very reflective of where we are as a society and what it means to be human. So that kind of sums the series up in a nutshell. I kind of blew through a lot of stuff there. So I know that if you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. That was an awesome presentation, Laura. I will go ahead and start unmuting. I see. I'm going to try and unmute everyone. Participants to yes. Okay, everyone, you should have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, or you can also go ahead and type something in the chat box, and Laura or I should be able to see it.
Chat box.
My question is, what would happen if the aliens came?
Good one.
I think Laura's on mute answering.
Oh no.
I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Technical it's like I don't do audio for a living. So that is a really good question. And a lot of people think differently about this. So there are some scientists who think, the aliens will come, they'll have this amazing technology, they'll be able to share that with us, we can learn from them, they can tell us how to deal with some of our problems, it's going to be a great relationship. And some people are a little more worried that, the aliens will come and maybe they will want to eat us, or maybe they will accidentally bring some sort of alien disease that they don't mean to make us sick, but they do. So, all of these are hypothetical because we don't know what the right answer is. We don't know what aliens would be like. It's all a lot of it is in our imaginations, and you can kind of envision a whole bunch of scenarios, but there are a lot of people thinking about, how this might go down and what it would look like. You can ask another question. Oh,
Yeah. My question would be, what's the single most important piece of evidence that we think is out there, I guess? Like, what is something that's made you think,
I think for me, it's the size of the universe. Like, it's the Drake equation. When Frank Drake broke that down for me and was talking about like the sheer numbers that we're talking about in, planets or stars with planets around them, planets that are in a habitable zone, the possibility of life arising on those planets. Even though there's so many hoops that you have to jump through to get to that, you still end up with a huge number. So I think there's probably something out there. I think the biggest hurdle is just going to be the amount of time and distance that we're talking about. Like there could be lots of them out there, but it's going to take us so long to find out that we might not ever know. And it's kind of crazy to think of that.
It's a big place, but it's an awful big waste of space.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say I loved the season 1, the Bigfoot season. So
thank you.
I'm a big fan, and I was super excited to see that they were going to have you on at our local library. So
well, thank you for listening. The Bigfoot one was fun. I had a good time with that.
We went to the Pacific Northwest last summer, and it was like the perfect, lead into that. And it's fun imagining Bigfoot in the forest. And I think we'll listen to this season as a family. So thank you very much for doing
You are very welcome. And I was very careful not to swear in the second season because I found out there were so many kids listening to the first one. So I took out all the swear words in the second one.
They've heard it before. So.
Okay. All right. So Laura, I don't know if you can see, but we do have another question in the chat box. It is, where can we find the whole series? So I'm assuming that means your podcast series.
Yeah. So the whole series, so both season 1 and season 2 are available through Apple Podcasts. And you can also find them on Spotify. You can find them on Stitcher. I can send some links to you if it would help if you're posting this at some point, Jennifer. Just let me know and I can send some of those, and that might make it easier for people to find.
Yeah, I bet I could add that to our YouTube. When I upload it to YouTube, we could probably add
in the
that.
notes. Sure. I'll make sure to send that information.
And it looks like we actually have a follow-up question. Are you planning a third season?
I am planning a third season. It's a little slow going because COVID is making it harder for me to get out and report. So in the meantime, every month I'm going to release a bonus episode for season 2, which are just conversations with different scientists and people and artists and writers and all these different people who are thinking about extraterrestrial life. Those will come out on the first Thursday of every month until I am able to get the third season sort of out the door, which will probably be, my guess is it's not going to be till the beginning of next year, but there's all these bonus episodes to look forward to. And there's actually one coming out this Thursday, so day after tomorrow, and it's with the astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson. So it was a really interesting conversation with him. He has a lot of very fascinating opinions and ideas about what extraterrestrial life is like.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I'll definitely keep a lookout for that myself. I really liked your first season, so I'm gonna
Thank you.
listen to your the second one as well. I actually had a question. I wanted to kind of go back to your mention of how movies, I guess, kind of reflect the anxieties that our current society has on like what an alien contact with extraterrestrial life would be like. And I found that fascinating, like the connection between body snatcher, invasion of the body snatchers and communism. I was wondering though, like, is there any more like more recent
Yes.
depictions? I was just curious about what.
Yeah, so I kind of move through time with her. We start with invasion of the alien movies really get going. Movies themselves really get going in the 1950s. So we started there with invasion of the body snatchers and some of those other, the Blob, the Thing, stuff like that. But then as you move through time, you get into the 60s and they're starting to explore more international relations. And this is where Star Trek starts to make its appearance. And you start to see more of this sort of like, a diplomatic corps for space, which is kind of an interesting idea. By the time you get to the modern era, I'm actually looking at my notes real quick because I don't remember all of the details. But, one of the movies that she references was, oh gosh, can I remember the name of it? District 9. So like we're talking about issues of colonialism and empire, and this is going on in sort of like the early 2000s. And she says that, a lot of what you see in movies like Avatar or District 9, these are questions about what happens when these are stories about what happens when one empire suddenly has an influx of aliens, or when two empires meet each other and they have to negotiate things. And the other thing I sort of came to learn in this particular episode is that the word alien is a Latin word that essentially just means, the other, the stranger. And so it's a word that gets used a lot in society, and it means a lot of different things. And I know that some of them have been considered negative, but in the original Latin, it just basically means the other. So that was an interesting little tidbit that I picked up as well.
Are there any other, does anyone else have any questions for Laura? Okay. Well, I don't see any more in the chat book chat box. And it looks like then we can go ahead and call it a wrap for tonight. Okay. Laura, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing with us what you know about the search for extraterrestrial life and your amazing podcast. So,
well, thank you for having me. It was fun to talk to you all, and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what you're going to see.
Yep. And for those of you who are interested in more of what the library is doing through our virtual programming, the 16th, we actually have a murder mystery role-playing game scheduled. And so we still have some spaces open for that, as well as we have a brand new program that we're trying on February 24th 24th, Wednesday. That's a Wednesday night. It's called our Supper Club, which is going to be a virtual dining event. It's kind of partnered with a recipe kit that you would pick up at the library and make a featured dish, as well as the kit will also come with some conversation starters that we'll use to kind of talk and enjoy food and fun during this Supper Club event. So both these and more programs are listed on our library events page. So hopefully you'll tune in and sign up. And with that, I will go ahead and end the program. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night.
Bye.